So, we've been talking about how we do things together, basically. How human beings manage to coordinate, how they manage to have a conversation, how they interact, as Goffman tells us, with civil inattention or the ability to dim the lights when we see each other as strangers rather than staring into each other's eyes when it's inappropriate. How we manage to come together when we applaud. How the person who is doing the speaking or the performer manages to coordinate and give the favor to the audience so that they know when is the time to applaud or scream or yell. How people manage to do that together. We've been talking about, I think, emphasizing the ways in which social organization works, as we say in sociology, social organization. That's a very big term that we use. How that actually works, and how we are mutually complicit in one another's behavior, and hence it has an overall organization. And in general, that organization, as you've heard about it so far in class at least, rather smooth. Now, you've heard of, however, of some instances where it's a little less smooth, like, for example, interruptions, and that smoothness has a pattern to it, and so does the lack of smoothness. And when there are interruptions, there is a kind of break with the kind of integrative mechanisms that are supposed to occur. And those interruptions have a pattern to them, that adults interrupt children more than the reverse, that women are interrupted by men more than the reverse, and so forth and so on. That starts leading us into today's class, which is sometimes things go off course. And it doesn't just operate smoothly. And indeed, some individuals, some types of individuals, some groups of individuals seem to break with the pattern. And the term that sociologists have traditionally used for that phenomenon, yes, is deviance. That is, some human beings are deviant compared to other human beings. But we are going to put quote marks, as it is on your syllabus, around this word deviance, because in a way, the history of sociology looking at these matters has been to increasingly intensify those quote marks and to say or get us to think about the idea that there aren't different types of people who do things that are odd or weird, but instead there are changes in context which causes other people to identify some as weird, odd, and unusual. And that we have to study deviance not as a thing, not as people out there, or even as acts, like taking a French fry off the plate of the person next to you, not as things, but rather as a process. And by understanding that process, we'll really get to a richness that we otherwise wouldn't have. So one of the things we can do is do a survey. And so I'm going to list some deviant acts that I'm going to ask you to identify yourself as having committed, if you have committed them, okay? So don't be admitting to something that you didn't commit. This is not a torture chamber, and you will not be punished severely if you fail to admit to a crime. But I'm going to read a list off. You can join and raise your hand at any point in this reading. I want to know if anyone here has ever stolen anything. And I'm going to lead off with that one. And I want to know, has anyone here ever plotted the death of a family member? No, I want it to be cumulative. So I want, keep your hand up if you've stolen anything. So that's it. Okay, now add in if you've thought through the death of a family member. You didn't do it. Keep your hands up. This is cumulative, okay? Cumulative. I'll give it all away. I want to show at the end of all this that we're all deviant, okay? So join me in that enterprise. Go along with me. I want to know if you've stolen anything. And first, let me see the thieves. Raise your hand. Okay, that's about, would you say 2/3? About 2/3. I got an official account here. Okay, now I want those people to raise their hands along with those people who have mentally plotted the death of a family member, brother, sister, aunt, and uncle, for whatever reason. I've done that. Anybody else? Am I the only one? Okay. And how about use of an illegal drug? Anyone who's ever done that? And marijuana is illegal, by the way. Raise your hand. Who has performed a homosexual act? Raise your hand. Who has picked their nose? I want to see your hand. Okay. Now, if you said yes to any of those questions, would you please raise your hand? Okay. Did we get 100%? I'm going to say we did. I see somebody who, you did, right? Okay. We fingered her, so to speak. We have somebody who I thought had been a perfect person, and it turns out we were wrong again, like we are about all our senators and people in the House of Representatives and all of those kings and queens who have fallen in front of our eyes. Well, anyway, there it is, that we are all deviant. And that means that, depending upon time and place, we're all available to be labeled as deviant. And the word label is a big term in sociology, and especially L-A-B-E-L, label. And it's an especially important term in this world of symbolic interaction and interpretive notions of how people carry on, is that deviance is like the tango. It takes at least two. It takes a person who does something, and then it takes someone who identifies what they did as weird, as deviant, as wrong. So they then pronounce that this person has done something that is off course, unusual in some negative way, and it needs to be pointed out. It needs to be identified, and they need to be identified. And often, of course, that label sticks. It has consequence. So if you are labeled by the psychiatrist as mentally ill, if you are labeled by your pal as selfish, if you're labeled by your lover, your spouse, your partner as mean and uncaring, those things, following the George Herbert Mead theory of symbolic interaction, those things become consequential. Now, there are various notions besides the one I'm giving you of what deviance is and what causes deviance and how we can identify the process through which some people are doing the odd and unusual thing. These are non-sociological orientations. And so within religion, for example, it was often thought that there was a deep moral failing and that there was in fact something wrong with the soul of that human being. S-O-U-L. I'll put it up here because it's a lovely word, but it's not a sociological word. That there is something in the soul that causes this person to be going bad. And some of the punitive qualities of social organization in some societies, in the medieval societies of identifying witches, for example, but across cultures, is to find out which human being has some kind of inherent vice, some sort of deep error in them, which has come through some spiritual failing in which it has infected them. So the devil got into them. The devil has a piece of them. And that's the end of the story in terms of the causal chain. The devil is in them. And then you, of course, have to take measures. And those measures can be quite violent. They can be locking people away, putting them in attics, putting them in prisons, or putting them to death, however the punishment system works, which is a somewhat different thing. Another interpretation of why it is that some people steal things, pick their nose, plot the death of a family member, kill people who are related to them, assume we have nobody in the class like that, and I'm not raising my hand, do illegal drugs or engage in homosexuality is that there is something biologically, something in their genes that determines those outcomes. And of course, that's not a totally ridiculous idea. And in fact, currently, the gay movement argues that homosexuality, if not homosexual acts, but homosexuality as a pattern, is based in physiology and biologically determined phenomenon. But this mechanism, the resorting to biology, the use of biology as explaining these outcomes is another way of doing it. It's not a sociological way, but it is a way. And just line that one up. And then, of course, the psychologists have their way, which is that it may or may not be biological, and some psychologists are biologically oriented psychologists, but some of them are not, or less so at least, and they would argue that however it comes about in a way that implants it into the personality in a very deep way, as for example in infancy. And once it is established as a personality, it is present and prevalent and works itself out. So you have a bad psyche, and Freudian psychiatry and other versions as well are oriented toward finding exactly what that usually early experience in life was, such that it acted like a little motor and sent you on your way, including these antisocial, deviant paths that are creating a whole lot of trouble for a whole lot of people. Now, this is sociology. So we're not going down those biological or psychological routes. And one reason we don't is because we have some evidence that suggests that that's not the way to get the best explanation. And you have already seen some of that evidence before you. So in the Milgram experiments, to bring that one back again, it seems to most, not only sociologists, but I think to most people, that the 2/3 of human beings who inflict pain are not sadists. It's unlikely that it's being biologically determined. It's unlikely that these people all have weird personalities that have been implanted in them. Instead, there's something about the situation that calls forth this behavior. And whether it's just experimental and you think you're shocking people because they're not learning, or you're Adolf Eichmann, who is arranging the destruction of the Jews of Europe, you are in a situation rather than being extraordinarily evil or odd or deranged in some way. There's something about this situation. I want to tell you about another experiment that was done, in this case, at Stanford. And sometimes I show this because it's available, at least it is available in a film, and I've shown it. And it's another very famous one, along with Milgram, oriented in much the same way. And what Zimbardo did at Stanford, was he set up a prison, a phony prison, in the basement of one of the Stanford buildings. And into this prison, he brought in undergraduates who are, again, always the fodder, or not always, but often the fodder for our experiments. And Zimbardo randomly assigned them to roles as either guards or as inmates, as prisoners. Each group had its own separate costume. It had its own number. They're all males, all undergraduates at Stanford who have been randomly assigned. What happened over time, not much time, just a couple of days' time, is that the people who were assigned these roles actually took them on and started to enact them. And so the people who had been identified to be jailers then indeed became jailers and started abusing their prisoners. And the prisoners, rather than walking out which they all knew they could. It's all make-believe. They're on the Stanford campus, which is full of palm trees and grass and loveliness. They know they're on the campus. They don't walk out because they're prisoners. And if you saw the video, as I have, I think you would find it as convincing as Milgram, because the prison guards are screaming at these people, at these young guys. And the young guys are in places crying, breaking down, begging, asking for favors, ratting on each other, trying to support one another. All the things we know that go on in actual prisons were being replicated in this prison experiment. And it reached a point after only 3 days, I think it was, maybe 4. Does anybody know? When they actually had to close the experiment down. Zimbardo ended the experiment prematurely because he saw that the consequences were much too severe. That's another example, by the way, of work that can no longer be done. And this was much more harsh than what you saw the man going through in the Milgram experiment, in which you saw he was quite bothered by what he was doing and what he knew he was capable of. This one is much more severe. And you're dealing with 19-year-olds who are Stanford undergraduates, people much like the people who are in this room, except the young men all had long hair because it was done some years ago. So we're starting to then build some information here for the sociological attitude that, that somehow something like situation matters, and matters a whole lot. And that starts telling us that this thing we call deviance needs to have these quotes around it, because it is a matter of calling it deviance and calling people deviant, who are, in effect, in a way, just like you and me. And in the case of the Zimbardo experiment, that's almost literally true, just like you and me. It would be that the same kinds of things would happen. And then we have, you'll recall the writings of Emile Durkheim, French, long dead, H-E-I-M, Emile Durkheim, who is one of the founders of sociology. And I told you earlier that Durkheim's, one of his contributions was to tell us and indicate that there are rates of social things that go on. The rates of suicide in one country are much higher than the rates of suicide in another country. If it's biology, how could the biology of Protestants be that different from Catholics, or the French from the Germans? How could that be the case? If it was deeply in the psyche, well, it's conceivable, but it doesn't make as much sense. Why is it that for generations the murder rate in Canada ran at 1/4 the murder rate of the United States? That the murder rate of Singapore is a fraction, it's almost non-existent compared to the murder rate of Canada. Could these people, could the demons, the devils, the weird personalities gotten somehow into the Americans and escaped the Canadians? And in Singapore, they're just not there at all. Instead, we have to start thinking that there's something about the situation that causes these rates to be so different from one country to another. They're not like slightly different, they are radically different. And that tells us that things that we treat as the height of deviance, like murder, itself must be situational. It's not inevitable that there be murder in a society, or rape, for example, to take another one that we think of as so deeply intrinsic, or perhaps some people think is deeply intrinsic to some human beings compared to others. Then we have the phenomenon, so we have the phenomenon of different rates from one place to another, and one group of people to another. And then we have changes over time. And so if you just thinking within the United States, we've seen major changes in the way we regard, for example, divorce. It used to be that a divorced woman lived in shame. And once a divorce occurred, she would often leave the town or community in which she's in and go live as a divorcee, another whole status in life, and often have to move into the center of the metropolis, a place like Greenwich Village, with the other deviants, where there would be the nose pickers and the homosexuals, the drug users, the dope smokers, and the divorcee, all living together because these are the spots that they can escape into. That fact that they moved is evidence for us, but there's plenty of evidence besides it, that being divorced was itself a deviant situation to be in, especially for the woman. The man would tend to remarry, still does, at a higher rate than the women who are left out. The most fun one is, let's see if we can have some fun here. Come on, baby. Someone yell out what I should be doing. I'm looking for my little, I've got everything where it needs to be. I've got slides to show you. I have lovely things. I don't know why I'm not getting a menu down there. Maybe what? Hit escape, always a good thing. And, oh, I know what I should have done. I shouldn't do what I'm doing is what I should have done. Come on. I thought this lights up on the bottom. Yeah. Let's do that. Now I'm doing random movements. It's getting to be very bad what you're seeing. I wonder. Well, you could just shout out requests. What would you like to see? Next page? No. What? Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray a little bit, and I think that's the best way to handle this. PowerPoint? I do. I want PowerPoint. So I couldn't make anything happen on the bottom. Oh, that's where it is. Here you go. Oh, okay, great. Hide your eyes. Some of this you shouldn't be seeing. And let's go to this one. Okay. So, so we're all at the mercy. This is we're going back in time. Okay. We're all at the mercy of other people. That's the slide. That's what this slide is trying to say. That's the point. Is that you can maybe not read it from the back, but it says the callous sophisticates laughed at Judy's tiny head, and we are all vulnerable to being labeled. Now, I gave out the list of theft and illegal drugs and a few other things to plot the idea that we're all deviant. But in fact, as we make our lives, the list is just far greater because we are all making judgments about each other's physicality, how we dress, how thick are your ankles, everything there is to think about. And we're all, in a way, sitting ducks. But sometimes the deviances are organized in other ways as well. So this is the Bayer company. It's originally a German company, the Bayer aspirins. We all know their brands very, very well. And Bayer is the source of aspirin, and we still buy sometimes Bayer aspirin. But they also invented heroin. And there's the ad, you see, for a number of Bayer products for aspirin and heroin. And they advertised the heroin also as a remedy for children's coughs. And the slogan was, "Let the hero in." And all the kids, of course, "Oh, mommy, mommy, can I have my heroin now?" And here is a cough medicine. And this is the Smith Brothers, which I don't know if it's still around, but when I was growing up, it was still the major cough drop company. And it is, can you see it, glycoheroin from Smith. So they're also marketing it as a health remedy. Now, until 1906, probably many of you know this. Do you know why Coca-Cola is called that? Yeah? Is there anybody who doesn't know? People didn't used to know. And oh, you don't know, good. So you get something for your tuition. Here it is, okay? And for anybody else also who doesn't know, Coca-Cola is called that because it contained cocaine. Until 1906, Coca-Cola consisted of cocaine. The original formula was wine, cocaine, and the sweet syrup. And it was only in 1906 that they took the cocaine out of Coke and made it just the Coca-Cola that we know and love, and put caffeine in it. All the drugs in the United States, it wasn't until 1914 that the United States, between 1914 and 1917, made drugs illegal, period. The Founding Fathers could do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to get stoned on X, Y, or Z, and there's almost all cultures have ways of getting stoned, either through alcohol or opium or the root of some magic thing, datura, which is a plant that grows in the American Southwest. Whatever it is, there's a way to get loaded. And it was only in the 20th century in the United States that we decided that getting loaded was a bad thing. And one of the reasons for these laws against getting loaded was the fear of poor people getting loaded and becoming unmanageable, and in particular blacks. There was this worry that African Americans would become crazed. Crazed Negroes was the term that was used. Crazed Negroes would arise, and we would have a disorder that would be kind of crazy. Now, that point of the idea that the restraint on drug use and the kind of social groups that you're worried about, that those two things happen hand in hand, is not uncommon. And again starts telling us that it isn't the drug itself, it isn't the use of the drug itself, it's something to do with who's using it and what you're worried about in their use of it that starts creating the situation in which you need to do something, about it. Let's talk about homosexuality. And we're going to talk about sex much more later on in the course, but this is certainly relevant to this topic. So we'll jump up ahead and talk a little bit about homosexuality. Because we're living at a time right now when homosexuality is in effect transitioning from a deviant act to one which is less classified and less frequently classified as deviant. And right now, as we speak, you may have been watching it in the news, the American Psychiatric Association, which once indicated that until the 1970s, that classified homosexuality as a mental disease. During my lifetime did the American Psychiatric Association take it out of the listing of clinically deviant behaviors and start treating it as in some way normal. And right now what they're doing is worrying about other diseases, like addiction to computers, for example, and video games. And some people are saying that that should now be classified, labeled, identified, in this case by professionals, by the professional labelers who are American psychiatrists, so that we can start controlling and treating this particular disease. Well, getting back to homosexuality, it is something which has traversed this pattern from being totally unacceptable, the work of the devil, illegal, subject to death, to something that here in downtown New York, at least, we see all around us. Something that is perhaps less obvious to you is the sin of masturbation. and I want to talk to you about that sin. I have in my hand a page from the Boy Scout manual that was used in the 1920s and 30s in the United States. And I'm going to quote from the Boy Scout manual. And there's a section on continence, meaning staying on keel and not using any substance or giving in to temptation. There is one temptation that is pretty sure to come to you at one time or another, and I just want to warn you against it. So this is the Boy Scouts of America talking to the Boy Scouts who would be reading this manual. And it goes on to say that many boys have written and in about this problem, about this secret vice, as it's called. And the wording here is to the Boy Scouts, this secret vice is not a man's vice. Men have nothing but contempt for a fellow who gives way to it. Some boys, like those who start smoking, think it is a very fine and manly thing to tell or listen to dirty stories, but it only shows them to be little fools. Yet such talk and the reading of trashy books or looking at lewd pictures are very apt to lead a thoughtless boy into the temptation of masturbation. This tends to lower both health and spirits. But if you have any manliness in you, and I hope you're listening to me, if you have any manliness in you, you will throw off such temptations at once. You will stop looking at the books and listening to the stories, and will give yourself something else to think about. Sometimes the desire is brought on by eating food that is too rich, or from sleeping in too warm a bed with too many blankets. It is a help at such times such as these to take a cold bath or shower, or exercise the upper part of the body by arm exercises, boxing, etc. It may seem difficult to overcome the temptation the first time, but when you have done so once, it will be easier afterwards. If you still have trouble about it, do not make a secret of it, but go to your father or your scoutmaster and talk it over with him, and all will come right. So here is the drawing from that Boy Scout manual. A scout is clean in thought, word and deed. He knows what to do to the fellow who talks smut. And I make so much of this one, of course, because it's so much fun, but also because it displays a number of the aspects. First of all, besides the sinful quality of it, the inversion of it about what is manly and what is not manly compared to how we probably think today, there's also this clinical edge. That is, there's a how-to, there's a Oprah sort of thematic about how you can beat this thing, how you can overcome this temptation and triumph over it. And then there's a kind of medicalization of it, that it's about the food that you eat that's too rich, and that you can bring it under control by certain exercises compared, upper body, of course, that will help you deal with it. That's something that to watch for, because in one kind of, quote, deviance or another, there is this instant kind of explanatory frame that is always available and that we have to guard against as a pseudoscience, as a pseudo-clinical. It's always easiest for people at any given moment to look back and see the way the deviant structures that existed at a prior moment seem foolish in retrospect. It's much harder to do that with the life you're living and the time you're living it. But in fact, the invitation to sociology is to try to do that as well, to try to not just pull off the easy identifications by saying, oh, weren't people weird then? And instead to try to imagine that something like that is surrounding us as well, and that the process of labeling, the process of ethnocentrism that causes us to see one thing as odd or crazy or weird is due to the circumstances that we're in. And maybe indeed it's something we don't want to mess with. Maybe indeed it's something we believe in, but to try to have the sociological imagination to try to see how It is the setup rather than the essence that we're dealing with. There is various sociologists have talked about these matters in different kinds of ways, and I'm now going to go to our flash drive. Oh, I don't want the flash drive. I want the smart. Oops. Okay, there's our old friend Deviance. There are various sociologists who have tried to think through this in stronger ways and continued this discussion with other applications. So our friend Erving Goffman, who you've been reading about, wrote a whole lot about the idea of stigma and the way in which this process of labeling something as negative operates as a stigma. And stigma comes from ancient thinking and practice of imposing a stigmata on another human being, such that the scarlet letter on their forehead or some other change in their body on their face that marks them wherever they go as someone to be avoided or someone to be treated less well, and that we engage in stigma. And sometimes it's done informally, as when we judge each other. Sometimes it's done professionally, as when a psychiatrist identifies someone who is crazy. There is some writing that's been around for a long time, The Myth of Mental Illness, which is a book that is conceptually radical, written about 25 or 30 years ago, that uses this idea of labeling to argue that there is no such thing, I use the word thing again, as mental illness. What's wrong with someone taking a French fry off your plate? Why don't you just live with it? Why don't you just deal with it? Why don't you just accept it? And this whole arsenal of identifying people who are different and distinctive and then classifying them in a medical way as psychiatrically damaged and then performing a lobotomy on their brain or putting them on drugs, that these are extreme acts and not necessary and are inappropriate. Right now there is much discussion, of course, with children and the degree to which rambunctious children should be classified as hyperactive or having some other more sophisticated still kind of classification that is laid on them such that they need special help, special schools, or drug therapy in order to bring them down. To what extent, in other words, is a rambunctious child simply a rambunctious child, or is that child diseased and deviant? And thus they need to be labeled, identified, and treated accordingly. We are still very much, it's, I think, inescapable that we have these zones of having to make up decisions and do something about it. Now you're also, you're not yet reading, but I think it comes up that you will be reading work by the sociologist Howard Becker. And Becker, among other things, wrote about what he called moral entrepreneurs. That is, there are people who have made it their life to go around, or at least an aspect of their life, to be entrepreneurs in deviance. That is, we, in ordinary life, I think we maybe think of them as gossips. Oh, so-and-so, have you heard about Minzy Starr? She got pinched in the Astor bar. Well, have you ever? What a terrible thing to have done. So all kinds of things can be informally the basis of moral entrepreneurs' work. But there are people who go around and say, wow, there are people who are getting stoned. This must be stopped. And that was the kind of thing that led to the drug laws in 1917. And that these crazed Negroes are going to get us all in trouble. And also their hippie bohemian white friends who are up to no good. We must do something about that. And so there are all kinds of people who are organizing other people around the idea that people are doing things which need to be curtailed, need to be stopped. And Becker called them moral entrepreneurs that have to be dealt with. Becker also wrote a very famous article many years ago, and it was called, you can't see it up there, if I write it here, I'll write it here, called Becoming a Marijuana User. Let's see if I get this. Oh, I'm running out of space here. Becoming a marijuana user. And what Becker concentrated on was that when you get stoned, you have to learn how to get stoned. So again, it's the social aspect of this deviant act that's very important. Here we go. If you are, I won't ask again in the room how many people here who have ever been stoned on marijuana. Oh, why not? How many of you have been stoned on marijuana? Raise your hand. Okay, we have a vast majority. So I was going to ask you, what was it like? And here's why I ask you what it was like. The reason why I ask you what it was like is because what it was like is based not on the chemical substance alone, but rather on the social context in which it occurred. And Becker points out that you have to learn to be a marijuana user. And by learn, it means things like figuring out where you're going to get the stuff. There's a certain technology involved, especially if you have to roll your own joint, you have to have the coordination, you have to practice, all of that. But the most important things are the idea that when you are using marijuana in the classical way, you do it with other people. So marijuana use, compared to, say, donut eating, is something that is done with other people, typically. And if someone hears that you ate a donut by yourself, it's no big deal. But if you've done your marijuana by yourself, but why? Because the major thing with marijuana use is to do it with other people. And other things happen to you when you do it with other people. It's like the coordination that occurs when applause is trapped. When people who are in the know, who know how to get stoned, start smoking marijuana together, they start giggling. And the giggling becomes like applause at the theater. That starts becoming something that suffuses through. And when one person's laughing, the other person laughs more because they're laughing, which causes them to laugh more because they're laughing. If you just spike somebody's brownie with marijuana and they don't know that they're getting stoned, they won't be stoned. The consequence, there'll be one. There are typical physiological things that happen in terms of reaction time and so forth and so on, will happen with marijuana. Those will occur. But all the things that we think of is what happens when people get stoned, it doesn't happen. No zeal for brownies and chocolate chip cookies. It doesn't happen that way. So you have to learn to be a marijuana user. And that means that the social interaction, the social context that surrounds the smoking of dope is intrinsic to what it means to be smoking dope. You can't do dope without it. You can't do dope in the sense that Becker means getting stoned, and I think that we all typically mean getting stoned. You also are reading this term, I can't remember if it's this week or in a subsequent week, a piece of a book by a sociologist named Lav Humphries. And Lav Humphries is no longer alive, and the story can now be told. He himself was a gay American, and I'm just going to make myself a little room the old-fashioned way. he we'll put it right in the little circle here. He did a study of men having sex with each other in a restroom. They used to be called tea rooms in the among gay men. They were called tea rooms. And when gayness was such a kind of outlandish sin, there was no gay lifestyle. There weren't, obviously, there weren't computer dating services. And so men would go to public restrooms in order to meet up and have sex. And Humphries would describe then, he did describe, the micro moves through which the men understand the intentions of other men and screen out men who will not be interested in having sex, so that you could create, in effect, a gay life in these men's rooms. And it is by learning, that's the idea again, learning, in this case, a kind of Goffman-like micro-interactional knowledge and skill that this world is brought off. And some of you may remember the senator from Utah, the Republican senator, the anti-gay Senator Larry Craig. Thank you. Is his name known to you? A survey, please. Yeah, you know about Larry Craig and all that, what happened. And Larry Craig said in his defense that he wasn't doing sex. He had no interest in sex. He just had a broad stance, is the way he sits on the toilet. If you know about this stuff, for example, through Lav Humphries, you know this is inconceivable because gay men go through great lengths in the restroom to make sure that there is no false cue, and that if anyone is responding, they are responding to cues that were absolutely unambiguous. That is a very complicated kind of choreography that leads to this thing finally happening or not finally happening, as the case may be. That it has that kind of learning quality that goes on to it. Humphries also learned, by the way, that the majority of the men who participated in the gay sex that he was tracking in the public restrooms were not gay. I mean, this is a pre-gay moment anyway. But the point is that they were married in the main, had jobs like telephone linemen. I always remember the telephone lineman. I think of that as a very un-gay kind of activity. And other kinds of pharmacists and whatever. And this then flew in the face, you see, of this idea that at the time, that homosexuals were a specific kind of human being. You see, get back to this idea, a kind of human being. It's not a kind of human being. It's a particular moment in a human being's life that you identify, you on the outside world identify, as something that we need to worry about. Action must be taken. These people must be singled out. A circle must be drawn around them and their lives. And then you must do something because they have done something. Humphries, we seem to have a run on this in this course, along with Stanley Milgram and Zimbardo. Humphries' research is the most controversial in the history of social science. Those three, I think those are the three big winners of the most controversial studies ever done, leading to this new set of rules about human subjects and protecting people from having to deal with other people who are deceiving them and tricking them. And the deception here is that Lav Humphries did not declare to the men in the men's room that he was a sociologist who was doing this work. He instead says that he reported to them he was what's called a watch queen. That is someone who stands at the window and makes sure that the police or a child is not coming, and therefore the sex can go on. That's his report. But the point is that he didn't say to them that he was a sociologist, and now we are supposed to do that. It might have actually changed the results. Hello, I'm your sociologist, and I'd like you to blow each other. That is not, it's not going to work, is it? Not a good methodological strategy. The other thing, the reason why it is very controversial, is because Lav Humphries did a follow-up study. His work was done at a public park. That's in St. Louis, Missouri, and that's where the public restroom was that he mostly studied. And the way this public park works is that people drive up and then go into the men's room. And he took down their license plate numbers. Then he found out who they were, where they lived. That's how he knows what they did for a living and all the rest of the stuff. And then sometime later, he went to their homes and interviewed them for what he said was a public health study. So now we have another layer of deception going on. He says he was not recognized when he did that, but now he interviews them and performs another deception in which he doesn't say who he is, that he's a sociologist, much less what this research is really about. And so that is considered a no-no. We cannot do research like Lav Humphries did anymore because of these series of deceptions that went on. And I leave it to you to decide whether or not the price is worth paying to do the deceptions in order to learn, or whether we just have to do without the learning, or we have to come up with other ways of learning. Finally, I want to return to Durkheim again, our French dead friend. And Emile Durkheim had also ideas about what we've come to call deviance. He didn't use that word, of course. For one thing, he was French, though maybe the same, deviance, I don't know. It sounds right. Maybe a French word to start with. But anyway, that wasn't his framing. But what he did say was that people in every country, every culture, mark one another off from other cultures, in part by imposing rules and boundaries, things, lines which it is wrong to cross. And by having these rules about what you should and shouldn't do, you are saying what we should or shouldn't do in order to identify ourselves as part of this social group. So Jews don't eat pork. And if you do eat pork, look what you have done. Americans do not eat soy or horses. Let's do that. We don't eat horses. We may shoot them, but we don't eat them. And that's who we are. And so these rules, which seem in a way silly or ridiculous, and then through a kind of relativistic orientation, as we try to shed our being so in love with our own cultures, that these ways of forbidding things are ways of identifying who we are. If you don't have an out-group, you don't have an in-group. If you don't have things you shouldn't do, you don't have things you should do. And when you, in effect, list the boundaries, the rules, the trespasses that mark off any given society, you're seeing the mechanism through which that society holds itself together and provides a kind of mutual identity. And now, truly finally, what I've been pushing is this idea that deviance is a process, that it's an ensemble, it's not an essence, or at least that's the sociological way of looking at it. That leaves us, though, with a dilemma. And the dilemma is nothing evil? Is everything the same? Is it all situational? Is there no such thing as free will? Is everything to be excused because of the fact that the context caused people to do that? That, of course, the Bible says thou shalt not kill, but if someone is in battle, then they have to kill. And of course that would be true. At a picnic, it's important to kill the ants before they get into your sandwich. And of course that's true. Or is it that these things are wrong in themselves, or all of them are right depending upon the circumstance? We're faced with this huge problem that is the problem in philosophy, across the social sciences, and in literature as well. It's the problem of relativity. Is it all relative to the situation you're in? Or are there, in some sense, absolute essences, rules, and laws of human nature that should not be crossed, no matter what the inducements are, no matter what the culture is, should that be the case? That's a dilemma that we'll probably turn back to as the semester goes on. It's one I'm never going to solve, but I invite it to you to consider. Thanks a lot.